Disciple Up number 191, The Slaughter of the Innocent. This is Disciple Up, the Disciple Empowering Podcast where psychology, science, the real world, sin, self, and culture meet head on, and Scripture rules. If you're a follower of Christ looking to grow or looking for some biblical answers, then get ready, because it's time to Disciple Up. Hey everybody, welcome to or welcome back to Disciple Up. My name's Louie. I'm your host for this podcast. Glad that you're with us today. This is Disciple Up, the Disciple Empowering Podcast, the best podcast, I can't talk, sorry. The best podcast that you've never heard. There we go. Recording this kind of late on a Tuesday night, which is very unusual for me, but this is an unusual time, and with crazy stuff happening, and it's super busy, and so I almost didn't do this podcast, but then I found some stuff that I wanted to talk about. You may have noticed the title of this, The Slaughter of the Innocent, and you may be thinking, oh, he left the S off because he's going to talk about the slaughter of the innocents in the Gospel of Matthew, where Herod kills all the babies 2 years old and younger. And no, actually, I'm not. I'm going to talk about the slaughter of the innocent, not one person, but a class of people that's happening right now, today, in this world, and we aren't being told diddly squat about it by our politically obsessed, on all sides, navel-gazing, worthless, hypocritical crap media. Yes, I said the word crap on Disciple Up, probably for the first time. Sorry about that. If you consider that a profanity, I do not necessarily, but it's not something I like to say very often. But I'll make an exception in this case because this is just absurd, it's obscene, it's unjust, and it's something that Christians especially should know about. If for no other reason than we can pray for our brothers and sisters around the world who, while we are complaining about how tough 2020 has been, well, many of them can't complain today about how bad 2020 has been because they were murdered during 2020 for being Christians. And I want to focus on one place where this is happening, just one. And I'm going to read some articles to you, or parts of some articles to you from different times this year. This stuff's on the web, but you never see it on the news, and it's never posted prominently in almost any newspaper you can think of. The place is Nigeria, and the fact is that thousands of Christians have been killed this year. Men, women, old people, and yes, children and babies have been slaughtered this year by Fulani Muslim tribesmen, Boko Haram, and other terror groups that have taken root in Nigeria. And it's appalling, and it's awful, and the worst thing about it is most American Christians, and probably Christians in the West in general, excuse me, most of us don't know anything about it. So I've got an article here from the Christian Post. By the way, there are links to all of these articles in the show notes at discipleup.org, and I got ahead of myself, so hold on just a second before I read this, because in the show notes at discipleup.org, I have got 5 episodes of Disciple Up from the past that focus on Christmas, and I recommend them to you, and I'm going to give you my 2 favorite ones in a second, but here they go. Episode 35, the very first Christmas episode I did, Should Disciples Celebrate Christmas? Episode 36, Tales from the Scrypt, the Christmas story. That was me reading for my blog, the scripts I'd written for my radio show, Tales from the Scrypt, where I tell stories from the Bible. Episode 87, The Non-Pagan Roots of Christmas, in which I prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that all this nonsense you've heard about how Christmas is pagan, really, and the Christians took it on, it's violating the church, and it's destroying it. It's all a lot of baloney. Episode 88, Christ is in Xmas. Many of us have been taught that Xmas is a bad thing. Oh, it's Antichrist. They're taking Jesus out of the... Wrong. I'll get into the roots of this in episode 88, I do. And then finally, episode 139, the real meaning of Christmas and other Christmas stuff. I recommend, if you haven't heard episode 87 and episode 88, that you listen to them, because this really gets into some history, church history that people just don't know about, and you find out the roots of some of the things that everybody thinks are true, and they're basically just based on maybe one person's writings who said he heard these things from somebody else and he wrote them down, and now people think it's gospel and it's completely historical fact, when in fact it isn't. So check those out. Now, if you're looking for a more traditional Christmas podcast episode, there's a few for you. Now I want to get back to these articles on Nigeria. This first one is from the Christian Post, as I said, from Wednesday, July 15th, 2020. Now it's like 6 months ago. Well, not quite, 5 months ago. And the reason that I picked this is because I'm going to show you a post from later this year to show you the progression of what's happening. The title of this article, which was written by Samuel Smith, U.S. editor, says 1,202 Nigerian Christians killed in the first 6 months of 2020, NGO report. Nigerian Civil Society Group estimates that 1,202 Christians have been killed in Nigeria in the first 6 months of 2020 by jihadists, radicalized herdsmen, and others as more... Wow, if I could read, it would be so good. Radicalized herdsmen and others, as 22 more Christians were reportedly killed in Kaduna State last weekend. As rights groups continue to voice concern about, quote, genocidal, unquote, crimes being committed in Nigeria, the Anambra-based International Society for Civil Liberties and the Rule of Law has released a new report stating that no fewer than 1,202 Christians were killed between January and June 2020. Intersociety, an organization headed by Christian criminologist, I have no idea how to say this name, Emeka, and then it starts with a U. Good luck. Relies on, and I'm sorry, but I'm just not good at pronouncing those kind of words, relies on what is deemed to be credible local and foreign media reports, government accounts, reports from international rights groups, and eyewitness accounts to compile statistical data. Due to the lack of adequate government record-keeping, death tolls reported by media outlets should be construed as estimates. According to the report, the majority of Intersociety's estimated 1,202 Christian death toll through the first 6 months of 2020 comes mostly from the 812 killings committed by members of the predominantly Muslim Fulani herding community, who have been radicalized to carry out attacks against predominantly Christian farming communities in the farming-rich Middle Belt states. In addition, 390 Christian deaths were attributed to killings committed by radical Islamic groups in the northeast, like Boko Haram and the Islamic State West Africa province, in addition to other perpetrators such as armed bandits. Yeah, the Islamic State may have been pretty much stamped out in Syria. That doesn't mean it's not in other places. Thousands of defenseless Christians who survived being hacked to death have also been injured and left in mutilated conditions, and several of them crippled for life, the Intersociety report states. Quote, hundreds of Christian worship and learning centers have been destroyed or burnt. Likewise, thousands of dwelling houses, farmlands, and other properties belonging to Christians, unquote. Intersociety reports that between January and the end of June, Boko Haram killed over 600 people of different religions, 260 of which were killed between May 15th and June 30th. According to Intersociety, 100 of those people who were killed by Boko Haram and ISWAP, that's the Islamic State, between mid-May and end of June, were strongly believed to be Christians. And it goes on. It says, as Fulani radicals have increasingly attacked Christian farming communities in recent years, the killings have been labeled by the Nigerian government and some human rights groups as part of the decades-long conflict between herders and farmers in Africa. However, advocates for Nigerian Christian communities contend that the herder-farmer conflict label is misleading because it doesn't take into account other factors at play, such as religious elements. All the areas under jihadist herdman attack are Christian communities. As to date, the Inter-Society report reads, there are no pieces of evidence anywhere showing killing of Muslims and taking over their lands, farmlands, and houses, or destruction of or burning of mosques by the jihadist herdmen. Wow, what a shock that is. The organization also warned that there's been a rapid increase in the number of young girls and women being abducted by radicals nationwide. Quote, in other words, Nigeria's genocidal and atrocious jihadists, including jihadist herdsmen and Boko Haram ISWAP, have rapidly increased their rate of abduction of the referenced females, both legally married and unmarried. Such abducted women hardly ever return when abducted, unquote. According to the report, abducted women are sometimes used as sex slaves by their captors and are forcibly married and converted to Islam. Now, this was in the middle of the year, and this article goes on quite a ways. This, of course, is made worse by the fact that the president of Nigeria is a Muslim and a fairly radical one at that, from everything that I've been able to read. Quote, the ongoing violence, this is from another report, the ongoing violence and loss of life in the southern Kaduna is emblematic of an enduring failure or unwillingness on the part of both levels of government to fulfill the responsibility of protecting all citizens in an effective and unbiased manner, unquote. In the Chembe district of the Logo local government area of Benno State, I'm sure I've murdered all those words, I'm sorry, 7 people were killed by suspected Fulani radicals last Friday. Benue Governor Samuel Orton called on President Muhammadu Buhari to declare Fulani radicals as terrorists. Nigeria ranks as the 12th worst country in the world when it comes to Christian persecution on Open Doors' 2020 World Watch list. Number 12. And in the first 6 months, over 2,000 Christians were killed. What's happening in the rest of those countries? Let's take a look at another one. This is from the FP Insider Access. This is by Patrick Egwu, E-G-W-U, October 9th, 2020. Christian victims in Nigeria fear future attacks. It's a picture of some Nigerian Christians. One of them holding a sign says, "Oh God, grant peace in our country, Nigeria." Amaka Nwoke stood in front of the St. Benedict Catholic Church in Oyo in Nigeria's southwest region, holding a placard that read, "Stop Killings in Nigeria." Nwoke, 24, had joined hundreds of Christians in the region to protest the growing killings and abductions happening across Nigerian Christian communities. Every day when I turn on the TV or on social media, I see killings and violence targeted at Christians, he told me by phone. I'm scared. She told me by phone. I'm scared, she said. These killings and abductions are so much and on the increase, even in communities you thought were safe and could not be penetrated. Well, they've been attacked, unquote. Insecurity still remains one of Nigeria's biggest challenges, according to the Institute for Security Studies. Across Nigeria, millions of Christians are living in fear because of the growing attacks by armed men or cattle herders from the Fulani ethnic group. Abductions and killings by the cattle herders are frequent and random in Nigeria, and Christian ethnic groups are the main victims. Cattle grazing often destroys crops, causing friction between the herders and the local farmers, and since the herders are Muslims, it reunites the religious tension between them and Christians. Under President Donald Trump, the United States has taken a renewed interest in religious freedom issues worldwide with a specific focus on persecuted Christians. On July 2nd, Trump released an executive order on advancing international religious freedom. The order directs the State Department and the U.S. Agency for International Development to take action to combat religious freedom violations and calls for a budget of at least $50 million for programs to fight religious violence and persecution abroad and protect religious minorities. So, according to the International Committee on Nigeria, a nonprofit group working to promote religious freedom and dignity, they say, quote, this new order demonstrates a continued commitment to promoting and protecting religious freedoms abroad by stopping crimes against people of faith, unquote. But U.S. efforts have borne little fruit so far. Multiple reports are coming in of increased killings this year, despite the country's coronavirus-related lockdowns. Yes, they have lockdowns in Africa. According to the report last December by the United Kingdom's-based Humanitarian Aid Trust Relief, more than 1,000 Christians were killed in Nigeria in 2019. The organization further reports that at that point, 6,000 Nigerians had been killed and 12,000 displaced since 2015. So in 4 years, at least 6,000 Christians are killed, at least 12,000 are driven out of their homes. Attacks on Christian communities have spiked under President Muhammadu Buhari, I guess that's how you would say it, administration. Buhari, who is also from the Fulani tribe and took office in 2015, has been accused by Christian leaders and human rights advocates of doing little to protect vulnerable groups that have been facing attacks over the years. Killings are often not investigated, and victims do not trust the government's sincerity or its capacities to bring perpetrators to justice. The International Crisis Group, an independent nonprofit organization, says farmer-herder conflicts in the country have taken an even higher toll than the better-known Boko Haram insurgency. An estimated 2,500 people were killed and tens of thousands displaced in 2016 alone. So this is insane. Let me give you some specific examples. On January 8th, 2020, 4 Catholic seminarians were abducted by gunmen in northern Nigeria from the institute where they were studying. 3 of them were later released, but Michael Nnadi, 18, was killed because he professed his faith even in captivity, according to a confessional statement by one of the suspects. His killing caused outrage in the community. Priests are not spared either. Last year, 8 priests were kidnapped in different parts of the country. Over the last 2 years, more than 5 priests have been killed by gunmen. In August 2019, more than 1,000 priests protested the killing of their colleagues. And on, and on, and on it goes. And there doesn't seem to be any slowdown or anything else. Now, in response to all this, last year, the U.S. State Department placed Nigeria on its special watch list for governments that have engaged or tolerated severe violations of religious freedom. Hasn't really done much. Mike Pompeo tweeted after a series of killings in June, "Our prayers go out to the loved ones of those killed in the recent weeks across Nigeria. We condemn this senseless violence and call on the Nigerian government to redouble its efforts to protect civilians." So that was October 9th, I believe. Let's just take, October 9th. Same day, different, this is the CP, the Christian Post, from October 26th, 2020. Nigerian Christians killed in Fulani ambush attack as violence skyrockets. Suspected Fulani extremists murdered a Christian man in an ambush-style attack, and he and two others walked home. According to the Emancipation Center for Crisis Victims in Nigeria, Justine Patrick was 25 when he was killed earlier this month. He was walking home from work with his co-workers, Daniel Griang and Sele Dung, through some maize fields about an hour before sunset on October 14th. Patrick walked behind the other two. "We never knew that a group of 7 Fulani had already ambushed us," he said. Guang said. The attackers rushed from the bush, raising sticks, machetes, and knives. Before he could react, they grabbed Justine and began stabbing him as the other two fled. We started screaming, and people who were relatively nearby rushed to our rescue. His picture shows Patrick as a young man with a smiling face and a lean build. He was buried on October 15th. Nathan Johnson, the Africa regional manager for Christian Advocate Group International, Christian Concern, said he doesn't know why Patrick was murdered, but he suspects it had to do with his face. Farmers aren't usually carrying anything of value, so they probably attacked him because he was a Christian. Justine Patrick is clearly a Christian name in Nigeria. If you're a Christian, you have a Christian name. If you're a Muslim, you have a Muslim name. This, by the way, is true in many countries overseas. And in fact, in Southeast Asia, I would say almost all the Christians I know there really have kind of like two names. They have a Christian name, more like a Western name, and then they have their own, tribal name that they would have from their tribe. Not all the Fulani are involved in these attacks, he said. It's specific militant sects. The Nigerian government will likely not find and punish his attackers, Johnson said. The violence that plagues Nigeria's Middle Belt region between the Christian South and the Muslim North is an embarrassment that the nation's leaders prefer to ignore. The Nigerian government has shown that they care nothing for the deaths of civilians like Justin. There have been hundreds of attacks like this in 2020 alone, he said. Thousands of people have died at the hands of extremist groups such as Boko Haram and the Fulani militants. The Middle Belt has what we call the Fulani militant crisis. Nigeria's cattle-herding Fulani tribe are almost all Muslim. They once traveled into the fertile Middle Belt after local farmers had harvested their crops to graze their cattle on the leftover fields. The manure their herds left behind helped fertilize the ground. Because the farmers and the Fulani used the same land to make a living, there have always been conflicts, Johnson said, but recently the violence has skyrocketed. International Christian Concern statistics count 600 murders by Fulani tribesmen so far this year. It's definitely a different level of violence now. Entire villages have been wiped out. So there you go. What can you do? Well, the article says here, to help Christians in Nigeria's Middle Belt, Americans can tell their representatives in Congress to pressure the Nigerian government. People can also donate to persecution.org's initiative to build farms in Nigeria so families who have lost loved ones to Muslim extremist violence can support themselves. Everyone's heard of the terrorist organization Boko Haram, Johnson said. People need to understand that the Fulani crisis is probably the bigger issue for Christians in Nigeria. They've killed more people than Boko Haram in the last few years. Human rights groups and bodies like Jubilee Campaign and Christian Solidarity International have issued warnings stating that the violence suffered by Christians in Nigeria at the hands of radical herdsmen and Islamic extremists is reaching the level of genocide. Genocide. Big word there. Of course, genocide means you're trying to destroy an entire people group, whether it's a tribe or a nation or, in this case, Christians. Genocide. That's a loaded word, especially in international law, because genocide is illegal under international law. And so to say that they are reaching that level shows that their goal isn't just to kind of push the Christians out of a certain area or something, which would be bad enough, but their goal is to kill or convert every single one of them. So I know this is probably not what you wanted to hear on the day before Christmas Eve. That's when this will be released. December 23rd, 2020. Yeah, I know. This is not the kind of thing that I should be doing. Probably not going to be real popular with people. Well, too bad. You know, we're coming near to the end of 2020, and I may talk more about this whole 2020 thing next week. I don't know if I'm going to do a podcast next week or not. Haven't decided. I bet I probably will. It's kind of like a habit with me now. But, oh my gosh, it's been a tough year, and a weird year and a strange year, and it's a bizarre year, and it's been a mega frustrating year. And we, as, Christians have been struggling like everybody has with these lockdowns and all the weirdness, and it's just affected people emotionally, and it's affected people mentally, and it's affected people spiritually in a bad way, people in recovery, people with mental illnesses, all these stupid, idiotic, changing, jumping around from this rule to that rule to this thing to that thing to whatever thing. It's just driving people nuts, and it's, the suicide rate's up and all that stuff, and you probably know all that. Meanwhile, on the other side of the globe, while we're whining about what a tough year it's been and how we can't wait for 2021 because we think magically things are going to get better on January 1st. And guess what? They're not. The COVID virus doesn't know what the calendar says. It also doesn't know what time it is, but there's a lot of governors and mayors who seem to think it does, but never mind that. On the other side of the globe, Christians are being slaughtered. They're not dealing with mental depression. They're not dealing with stupid government regulations. They're not dealing with the media trying to beat them into submission and scare the crap out of them. No, they're being killed. They're being slaughtered, stabbed, beat to death. Believe me, these people are not going to be trying to kill, if you can even do this, humanely. No, they're going to use whatever they have to kill people, and if you have to suffer, tough. Particularly the ISIS group. Of course, ISIS is infamous for wanting people to suffer, and they're very good at it. We've all seen that from a few years ago. So now, how's your 2020? You may be thinking, geez, couldn't you have done this next week? Yeah. But actually, I think this really does apply to Christmas. Now, today, it's a Tuesday. It's Tuesday, December 22nd, and it is now 8:43 p.m. when I'm recording this. I went in, as I do on Tuesday mornings, and I record the two radio shows that I do. I do two short-form pre-recorded shows on KLPZ, our local our local AM station. And one is called The Ultimate Sacrifice, which was created by the guy who's still sheriff for another month or so. And then, unfortunately, he didn't get reelected like I was hoping he would. Great guy named Bill Risen. And I've sort of taken that over from him, and we tell stories there. I tell stories of real American heroism, usually Medal of Honor winners, but not always. And then I also record Tales from the Scrypt. That's the show that Keith's the owner of the station, came up with, where I tell Bible stories. I research them, I write them myself. It's all on me. And I went in there today, and I recorded both of those shows. And today's show, interestingly enough, for the Christmas story, because I've been doing the Christmas story for the last this was number 5, so the last month. The Christmas story came after the birth of Christ. You may say, well, wait a minute. If you're doing a series on Christmas for Tales from the Scrypt, why would you be doing something after the birth of Christ? Well, of course, most of you probably know, if you're going to get the wise men into the Christmas story, you've got to wait a long time until after the birth of Christ, because the wise men didn't get there until Jesus had long been born. When, according to Matthew, they came to the house where they were staying, so they were not at the creche, that's it always shows. That's completely and totally wrong. And I wanted to read you just a little bit about it here. Here we go. Now the Magi, of course, are warned by God to escape from Egypt. And so they do. Meanwhile, the next night, Joseph had another angelic appearance in a dream, who said to him, "Rise, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." Matthew 2:13. Egypt was a logical place to find refuge, as it was outside of the dominions of King Herod, and both Egypt and Judah were part of the Roman Empire, and they were linked together by China's 2,500-year-old ancient Silk Road, which made travel to Egypt relatively easy and safe. Thus, they were safe from Herod's bloodthirsty insanity. When he was sure the Magi had avoided him, he ordered all male children aged 2 and under in Bethlehem to be killed. This way he felt sure that the baby king could not threaten his rule. Now, many scholars doubt this story, because the only record of it is in the Bible. But why should this be a surprise, given how many atrocities Herod committed? Josephus, a famous Jewish historian who worked for the Romans, stated that Herod was so concerned that no one would mourn his death that he commanded a large group of distinguished men to come to Jericho, and he gave an order that they should be killed at the time of his death, so that the displays of grief that he craved would take place. Fortunately for these people, Herod's son Archelaus and his sister Salome did not carry out this wish. How many boys, aged 2 and under, could there have been in and around the tiny town of Bethlehem? 5? 10? Matthew doesn't give us a number. I wonder whether Herod, who had his own sons assassinated, remember, could have hired men privately to slaughter those innocents, and that it was not connected to him until after his death. Either way, the Holy Family stayed in Egypt until an angel told them of Herod's death. They returned home to Galilee. The Christmas story was done. The prelude of the greatest story ever told would soon give way to the ministry and mission of Jesus, which would take him all the way around Israel, through a tomb, and with his resurrection and ascension, into heaven. Now, that's the last few paragraphs of the Tales from the Scrypt episode, which I recorded today, which will air on Thursday morning. And one of the reasons I decided to go with this now is because I believe that the slaughter of the innocents is an integral part of the Christmas story. Now, it takes place after Jesus has been born, takes place when Jesus is in Egypt. But here's the thing. It's still an integral part of the story because it shows how the world reacts. Now, when you think about the Gospel of John in chapter 1, when he talks about things, of course, in a very philosophical, theological way, and he talks about the light shone in the darkness, and the darkness didn't understand it, and well, that's what the slaughter of the innocents is. It's just one example of so many that you see in the life of Christ, of people striking back at the light. And Christmas is all about the light, the Son of God, God becoming a man in the world. And so the Christmas story has to have some kind of pushback. It's not just all sweetness and light. It's not just all wonderful, wonderful, oh, let's feel so good, isn't it so great? It's Christmas time, ooh, woohoo, the Christmas spirit, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, tell that to the dead kids in Bethlehem, why don't you? See, Christmas is real, and so there's good and bad in it, because everything in this world has good and bad. Even if the thing itself is totally good, it is surrounded and impacted by the evil of the fallen world in which we live. And so the Christmas story is not without that. In fact, you actually see more than one example of that in the Christmas story. The whole census that was ordered, think about that. Caesar ordered this. He knew it was going to disrupt all kinds of people's lives, probably cause people to die on the trips trying to get back to wherever their hometown was, because who knows, they may have gone clear across the Roman Empire, some of these people, or they were old and infirmed and the trip was difficult. Of course, medical care is, not so great, so he didn't care. He was trying to figure out how things were working and how he could increase his tax revenues, because like all big governments, the Roman Empire had budgetary shortfalls and needed to squeeze as much out of everybody as they could. So that's right at the start of the story. So you see this over and over throughout the entire ministry of Jesus, and the Christmas story is no different. And we distort the Christmas story when we try to remove all the icky stuff and just have the stuff that we like left. Now, I understand that everybody needs a break. Everybody needs a time when they can just relax and be with people they love, or, focus on the God that they love. And I understand that totally, and that's fine. But in the larger view of things, I really think it's important for Christians not to forget that the slaughter of the innocents is still going on today. The slaughter of the innocent in Nigeria is just one example. Look at what's happening in China. We don't know a whole lot about that because the way they've locked their people down with the most oppressive police state probably in history, because it is so controlling, thanks to technology, most of which they got from us. And it's just a nightmare for those poor people. And that's, again, just that country. Look at you just go through the whole world and you see it over and over again. And in the midst of our Christmas joy, and in the midst of our whining about how tough our little lives are, maybe we should just stop and take a moment to, first of all, give thanks to God that we're here, not there, and then spend some time in prayer for our brothers and sisters in Nigeria and, again, other places. And then maybe ask God, Lord, what could I do to help? Is there something I could do that might make a difference? That would be an amazing Christmas gift now, wouldn't it? You'd never know how it impacted things, more than likely, but doing what's right and reaching out and trying to do something that's going to bless people, especially suffering people who are really being persecuted. What could be more amazing? What could be a better gift than that? So, there you go. That's it for this week. We'll probably be back next week. I'm thinking about doing a retrospective on 2020, although that's really depressing. So who knows? I'm not sure what I'm going to do, but show up and find out. Hey, if you liked this, there may be something wrong with you, but if you did enjoy the podcast and are still listening, God bless you. Way to hang in there. And please like this on your social media, share it on your social media, tell your friends about it. If you want to give me a Christmas present, that would be the most amazing thing that you could do for me. So till next time, this is Louie. And by the way, I should probably tell you, I forgot. If you want to get in touch with me and tell me I'm a Scrooge or whatever, email me, Louie, Louie, @discipleup.org, or you can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/discipleup, and leave me a note there. So till next time, God bless you all. Thank you so much for listening. And remember that every time is a good time to disciple up. So long.
Disciple Up, the Empowering Disciples podcast, is written, produced, directed, in as much as there's any direction of this thing at all, edited every once in a while, and paid for by Louie. It's his personal ministry, and is not connected to Christ Church on the River. CCR does not sponsor, pay for, or necessarily approve the content found therein. The theme music for Disciple Up is Hot Wheels by Varensky. Yes, Louie actually paid for the rights to this very cool piece of music, so don't worry, and please call off the lawyers, as he's busy enough without having to deal with all that. All opinions expressed during Disciple Up are Louie's and Louie's alone. They do not necessarily represent those of our sponsor, the Lord Jesus Christ. However, where the opinions, thoughts, impressions, and feelings shared are in line with God's Word and faithfully represent what our Lord says in His holy word, the Bible, then they are representative of our Lord Jesus Christ. If you're wondering how the heck you're supposed to know this, remember, God tells you to test all things. Hold on to the truth. It's up to you to do the due diligence that God commands, so do it. Don't whine about it, and don't complain about how hard it is. Don't blame me for it. Disciple Up, and do what you know you're supposed to do. If you'd like to know more about Louie or Disciple Up, please go to discipleup.org and check out everything you find there. Or not, it's completely up to you. Disciple Up, the Empowering Disciples podcast will, God willing, publish an episode every week covering different areas of concern to disciples of Jesus. If that's important to you, then please subscribe on iTunes, Google, Stitcher, or another one of the many podcast aggregators available to you. If it's not, then don't. If you'd like to get in touch, please email Louie at louie@discipleup.org. God bless you.